All right, I just want to welcome everybody on this Wednesday morning to our live wire with Abby Broyles. She has taken some time out of her really busy schedule as we're winding down this election season to talk to us today. We're going to be taking questions from the chat too. So if you're tuning in, you can drop questions in our chat and we're going to be monitoring those and asking some questions that have already been submitted from our Facebook feed. So I want to thank everyone who submitted those and welcome Abby. Thank you for taking up your time. I'm sure things are getting wild and busy right now.
Yeah, it's great to be with you this morning. Busy, but it's exciting.
Awesome. I have to say I haven't done a lot of interviews with senator candidates, but this year seems to be one of those like really important years that we need to really elevate the Indigenous voice. And you have a background in journalism, so you know the stakes in doing that. Can you just kind of give us your intro and tell us about you for our audience who might not be as familiar with you as we are?
Sure. Yeah, it's great to have this opportunity to talk with you this morning. My name's Abby Broyles. I'm the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate. I'm running against Jim Inhofe. I'm a lifelong Oklahoman. I grew up in Bethany, just outside of Oklahoma City. And from the time I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a journalist. I spent 10 years on the air as a news anchor and investigative reporter, and then put myself through law school at night, became a practicing attorney. And I got in this race because I saw a senator who's completely out of touch with everyday Oklahomans, out of touch with the realities that we face back here at home. There was actually a specific story that we were working on for a couple of years at Channel 4 in Oklahoma City, and dealing with military families who had mold and asbestos in their homes at Tinker Air Force Base. And we covered this story for a couple of years, and they had called and emailed Senator Inhofe's office trying to get some help, and they got no response. Just last October, Senator Inhofe finally came down to Midwest City, and I watched him tell these families at a press conference how nice their housing was. And if it was this nice when he was in the Army, he would have stayed longer. And it was just a few weeks after that that I got off the sidelines in this race because I deeply care about the future of our state. We need real leadership, and we have seen a complete lack of leadership this year from Senator Inhofe.
And he kind of has this like really established presence, and he's very influential. But I feel like our community, particularly our viewers and our audience, is primarily the Mvskoke Nation citizens, and then other surrounding Indigenous communities. But what we kind of see playing out right now in the landscape, and especially in law, we've had these really historic opinions come down from SCOTUS, and it reaffirmed something that I think a lot of the Indigenous communities have been saying for pretty much since 1866, is that our reservation is still here. And it's Senator Inhofe's rider from 2005 that kind of led to the EPA backdooring in and establishing this environmental presence, whittling down that sovereignty. And most of our viewers are real concerned with sovereignty right now. And do you have any kind of general stance that you want to talk about as far as the sovereignty of the tribes and bringing them to the table to, hash out issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I deeply respect the tribe's sovereignty. I think we need to be working government to government. For people who don't know that full story, back in 2005, excuse me, Senator Inhofe attached a rider to a transportation bill. It created the mechanism for what just occurred with the EPA decision a couple of weeks ago, allowing the state to take over environmental regulations on tribal land. And that is a slap in the face to the tribes. I mean, especially right after this McGirt decision. I think that it was a knee-jerk reaction to the McGirt decision. And I think that people like my opponent are going to continue to be working against the tribes because that's just what Inhofe has always done. If this weren't an election year, I am deeply concerned that he would take more extreme measures to, strip away even more from the tribes. But, it's an election year and he knows what that would cost him. And so he hasn't done anything yet. But I know that there was a lot of concern about it. In fact, a letter was sent to him from tribal leaders saying, do not do this. Don't disestablish our reservations, because that rumor was circulating for a couple of weeks in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and that's something that we were kind of paying a lot of attention to, is right after McGirt. And that was kind of like one brief moment of kind of people being able to celebrate their connection to the land again, and really kind of, but it was so brief because, like you said, those mechanisms started moving very quickly, and people were concerned that disestablishment would be on the table. So it was a real brief celebration, I guess, in some respect. But one of the questions that was submitted to us by Jordan Lee Harmon, and she asked, how will you fight against legislation? Because we really felt that the same way. If this had not been an election year, there would probably be just a congressional disestablishment on the table. And how do you plan to combat that?
I think with the exception of Senator Inhofe, our federal delegation is like me. We know that what is good for the tribes is good for Oklahoma. I think that, folks like Tom Cole, like Kendra Horn, there are members of our congressional delegation that do respect the tribe sovereignty. I think that whatever happens next, we need to make sure that the tribes are at the table when we're making these decisions. Congress is going to have to act for sure in response to especially the criminal aspect of the McGirt case and how those cases are going to be prosecuted and handled. But I certainly think that any conversation that happens needs to have the tribes at the table and not these kind of backdoor dealings that we have seen with my opponent, and make sure that we are all part of the conversation. Our federal prosecutors, tribal prosecutors, and state prosecutors have worked together in the past. We can do that again. There are going to be other issues that come down in other tribes that are affected by this decision with more litigation over the next few years. But I think we have to have a federal delegation that respects the tribe's sovereignty and making sure that we are doing what's right. And so I will do my part as part of the federal delegation to stand up, to fight for the tribes. And really, again, it goes back just to working government to government. I've heard from so many people that different tribal leaders have gone to Washington, D.C. To meet with Senator Inhofe, and he sends out an intern. He won't even meet with them. That is a government to government meeting. And that is how much my opponent has disrespected the tribes for so many years.
I noticed you said that you felt like when it comes to the criminal jurisdiction that you felt that Congress may have to take action. How do you envision that kind of playing out? So far we've seen like grants and funding coming through like federal prosecutors' offices, and that seems to be like really helpful. And from what I've been kind of watching of the Mvskoke Creek Nation in particular, it's almost been like more than if you give us some, we're going to invest double, because we've seen the tribe take $2 million out of its regular general fund budget and put that into justice. So what do you think congressionally may need to happen as far as criminal jurisdiction could go?
Yeah, I think we're going to have to put more federal funding into the prosecutor's office to make sure that, the U.S. Attorney's Office can handle those cases up there. If they, are retried, we need to make sure that the tribes are also getting the financial support they need, because there are going to be cases that are retried. We just know that from looking at the numbers, looking at the cases where people have significant amount of time left in their sentence. And so it really is going to come down to federal dollars having to come into the state of Oklahoma to deal with the criminal aspect, because we just simply don't have the manpower to re-prosecute some of those cases right now.
Yeah, we've kind of spoke with Trent Shores before, and he's kind of talked about recruiting these extra prosecutors to help him out, and then the funding to kind of get the staffing in place and everything to handle it. And we were always kind of just concerned that any congressional acts don't include any kind of disestablishment going forward. One of our viewers is asking how you want, like, have you gotten to the point where you've gotten a kind of a complete game plan on protecting sovereignty? Like, is there any specifics that you want to going forward and pushing that narrative out? Because we see that, Senator Inhofe is very influential, but his influence generally lies with the interest of, big industry. And so how do you kind of work to gain that kind of influence, but doing it for the little people like tribal citizens?
Mm-hmm. I think that, a few different things. First of all, I think that we need to, repeal what Inhofe did in 2005. We need to repeal that law that has allowed the EPA or allowed the state to now regulate the environment on tribal land. I think that we just need to be able to have conversations regularly, having an open door of communication with tribal leaders. Just this weekend, I was up in Northeast Oklahoma and met with a couple of members of the Intertribal Council, and hearing about their issues. And, for example, one of the tribes, they did not receive all the funding they should have from the CARES Act because they were shortchanged on how many members that they had. And so they didn't get enough dollars and to support them. The Shawnee tribe, because they don't have land, they were shortchanged on how much money that they got. And I think if we had a senator who has a great relationships with the tribes, things like that wouldn't happen, because we'd be able to advocate for them in my office and make sure that the dollars that they deserve would have gotten to the tribes. Right now, I know that so many people have depended on the tribes for, getting their stimulus check from them. That's how they're keeping the lights on, especially if they have lost their job this year. So I think that the game plan, it really, kind of first focuses on COVID-19 and how we deal with this going forward, because we know there's going to be more relief coming, hopefully at some point, and making sure that the tribes are getting their fair share of what they should be getting from the federal government. But then next, I think that we really have to make sure that we have a solid thing moving forward post McGirt, because this is going to be an issue from not just criminal prosecutions, but also with the tax issues, with how the governor is now trying to, use his oil and gas commission of folks to, decide what we do going forward. And so I think that we need to make sure that this game plan that we're talking about is really focused on the here and now. COVID-19 on one hand and McGirt on the other, and then we move forward. But I think that those two issues are so pressing, and we need a federal delegation working closely with our tribes to tackle those two huge issues.
I wanted to kind of touch on the EPA, or not the EPA, I'm sorry, but the COVID stimulus funding. That was like one of the really, it was almost like a double-edged sword when tribes were able to receive that. On the one hand, they desperately need the help and to be able to find some changes that needed to be put into place to help people. But then on the other hand, it was like this really out of touch kind of guidance from the federal government. They were giving out the broadest guidance possible, and it really included cities, states, municipalities. But when they kind of considered sovereignty and what tribes do, it was almost like what those governments did and tried to achieve were in different realms. And a lot of the tribes had a really hard time. Like you said, some of them didn't even get the funding that they had. And then the rest were trying to get guidance in a really small time frame on how exactly to spend this so that they didn't get into trouble later. Do you feel like going forward, having these people who represent tribal nations coming to the table and having a stronger voice would help those kind of situations and overall the function of the government to government relations?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, there need to be regular conversations happening with the tribes. I also think that, we need to have lawyers in a room. I'm an attorney, but I'll be the first one to tell you, it's tough when you look at all the rules that come along with that money. We need to make sure that we have people in the room who know exactly how to advise tribal leaders on that money, because whenever you're required to spend that money in a short period of time and you want to do it the right way, it's tough. And you're right, there's been very little guidance from the federal government. So I really think that there just needs to be just an open door policy where, we are always talking about the issues and making sure that that line of communication stays open, so that we are all working together. And again, what's good for the tribes is good for Oklahoma. If we are able to work together, we can, turn this state around. But right now we have so much, infighting. You have the governor picking this battle with the tribes. You have, everything that's going on with COVID-19. And, again, it all comes back to we need to be working government to government.
I was kind of following along on some of the recent indictments with the McGirt case. And we, like you said, we are seeing people re-indicted. For example, McGirt himself and Patrick Murphy, both re-indicted. And then there are several cases that have been in this kind of limbo that we're seeing come into the courts now because the McGirt decision was decided. And as a person who's been in the newsroom, how do you feel about news organizations who just report out these blind, really wild numbers saying, oh my God, all these cases. And and that impact to the Indigenous community when it's just left without that context.
Yeah, I think that it's journalists need to be responsible in what they are reporting and making sure that they are fact checking things, because I think that right now we kind of live in a scare tactic world where if you hear something on the news, you take it as truth, and there's a lot of fear mongering from people like my opponent. They're going on these media outlets and talking about things and just aren't being truthful. And so I think that it is the media's responsibility to not only fact check, but hold people accountable who are making these statements, because whenever you're allowing someone like a Jim Inhofe go on TV and just scare people with what he's saying, that's not holding him accountable. That's not being a good journalist. And so we do need to make sure that we are calling out journalists when they're not putting out the right numbers out there, because I know what you're talking about. There have been so many people who have just been terrified hearing these little news reports, thinking that the McGirt decision is the end of the world. And then you have people like Ted Cruz tweeting, well, the Supreme Court gave away half of Oklahoma today. I mean, and for people who don't understand, the law and who have not researched all of it, so much of that can be damaging, because, they just don't know any better. They just turn on the TV and they hear what they hear.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of our citizens kind of becoming, a little bit fearful of just different fallout from that, because our neighborhoods are so intertwined. I'm a citizen, but my neighbor on one side is of a tribe, and then the other one isn't, maybe, and you see these news headlines saying, oh well, a rapist is running free because of McGirt, and well, that was like a 30-year-old case. Did you really do what your due diligence in figuring this out? And then we've kind of also interviewed our tribal courts, and they're preparing and ramping up what they can do to handle these. But one of our judges kind of gave out the statistics talking about how right here in the beginning, it's very busy. And we might have an increased capacity well into the future, but the beginning numbers are kind of the swell of this tide. And then it's going to level out some. And it kind of becomes really hard on the citizens of tribes to kind of navigate their world with a tag that displays you're a tribal citizen, and then half of an angry population looking at you like you're the problem here. So I'm really glad to hear that's a concern. One of our viewers is kind of, our audience has been really concerned going forward in McGirt. We have laws in place that are not necessarily jiving with federal regulations. So right now is a really unclear time for Mvskoke Creek citizen who might be a medical marijuana card holder as well. Do you have any views on the decriminalization of medical cannabis for the federal level?
Yes, I want to decriminalize marijuana on the federal level. It has been a Schedule I drug for decades, at the same level as heroin. That federal law is antiquated. It was passed in the 70s. We do know that marijuana has medicinal use. So for it to be still a Schedule I drug is just unacceptable. We need to decriminalize that at the federal level, so that people in Oklahoma, for example, and that you're talking about, who may be growing, be part of the industry, they aren't worried about being prosecuted federally for something that is legal here in Oklahoma. But also it shores up the banking issue. This is, a major industry in our state now. And these folks can't get a bank account. I mean, they are entrepreneurs, they're small business owners. They have to operate in cash. It's dangerous and unsustainable. Also, the tax code works against them. Decriminalizing marijuana is what needs to happen to just really modernize our federal laws on this issue. And the states have spoken. So many states have passed at least medical marijuana. We are one of them. And it's time that the federal law be updated to keep up with that.
All right. I have a question from one of our regular viewers who submits really, really often. And it's from T.Y. Prohl. And he says that 2021 is the 160th anniversary of the Trail of Blood on Ice. And he wants to know if you would feel like that should be a national historic trail. I think that some of these landmarks that are very much intertwined with Indigenous communities are very vulnerable in a sense of how important they are to the Indigenous communities, but also that they're not really nationally recognized either. And so we find that, often, tribal citizens have to go and protest or show a presence to kind of protect these historic landmarks. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we definitely need to be talking about our history. And I think that, that would be great if it's recognized nationally. I think that, Oklahoma's history is tribal history. It's we just don't talk about it enough. We don't teach it enough in school. I think that having bringing awareness to exactly what's happened and talking about historic landmarks on an anniversary like that is a great way to make sure that our young people are growing up and learning about the history behind who started here in Oklahoma and how that has transitioned and what the tribes contribute today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that's about all the questions I have from chat and from Facebook. Abby, I was just going to give you a few moments to kind of leave us with some final thoughts for anybody who's out there kind of looking for their last minute kind of indecisive kind of who am I voting for in this election?
Sure. Well, I'll say this, this election is about the future. Do we want more of the same? Someone who has had 26 years in the Senate to get the job done when we are continually on the bottom of so many lists when it comes to public education, when it comes to healthcare? Or do we want to choose someone new who's going to work hard for Oklahomans each and every day? I am an everyday Oklahoman. I ran for office because I saw Washington as a place that's badly broken and needs real leadership. The biggest thing I want to do is tackle healthcare. I want to make sure that every Oklahoman has access to quality, affordable healthcare. Too many families I've talked to tell me they are choosing between putting food on the table or paying for health insurance. Right now, the Affordable Care Act is under siege with what is happening with the Supreme Court. That is exactly what is on the table. It's a political power play to strip people away from their health care because this nominee has said in the past that she thinks that the ACA is unconstitutional and she would overturn it. But the reality is 200,000 Oklahomans were relying on getting access to healthcare finally because we spoke and we passed Medicaid expansion in June. We need to drive down the cost of prescription drugs. Too many Oklahomans are telling me they're making their 30-day supply of prescription drugs stretch for 60 days because they simply can't afford it. Most people are one health emergency away from financial difficulty and two health emergencies from financial ruin. My opponent just said last week that his solution to fixing healthcare is for people to just get a job, get a better job that'll pay for your healthcare. It is 2020. No one should be having to crowdsource their healthcare costs. I want to fix healthcare. I want to be an advocate for every person from every walk of life in our state. And again, this election is about the future. It's about our kids and leaving this place a better one, making our state even greater. And right now, we just have a completely out of touch senator who does not understand the issues that we face in 2020.
All right.
So I'd be honored to have your vote.
All right. Thank you, Abby, so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule. We wish you much luck. And I think we're just going to sign off with that. And if anybody has questions or you want to come back and visit the chat and kind of hit people up, you're welcome to do so. Thank you so much. And that's going to wrap us up.
All right. Thank you.